What's up everybody? Nathan Brown here with FCP Euro, and today we're here to talk about the brakes, suspension, body, and electronics on the first generation Porsche Cayenne. We're going to go over these systems and talk about some of the common problems you may encounter and the repairs and solutions to those issues. So before we get into any of the specifics on the brakes or suspension on the Cayenne, I do want to mention, and you'll hear me mention this throughout this video, that the Cayenne's a fairly heavy car, so you need to make sure that whatever you're lifting it with is rated appropriately. You want to use a solid 3-ton jack and 3-ton jack stands because it is a 5,000-pound vehicle, and just obviously whenever you're under a car, you have to be very aware of safety. But with something as big and heavy as a Cayenne, you really need to be kind of aware of those issues. So first things first, we're going to jump into talking about the brakes on the first generation Porsche Cayenne. So the most common issue you're going to have on the braking system on the Cayenne is simply using the brakes up. It's a fairly heavy truck at 5,000 pounds, and it takes a lot of energy to stop it. If you do a lot of stop and go driving, or if you're really hard on the brakes, you may be replacing these as often as every 20,000 miles. If you do a lot of highway driving, you may be able to stretch that, but using up the brakes is just part of life with the Cayenne. So depending on the wheels that you have on your car, if it's a 17-inch model, usually a base model, it's going to have a 330 millimeter front disc. If it's Cayenne S, GTS, or most of the turbos, it's going to have a 350 millimeter front disc with a 330 millimeter rear. And if it's a Turbo S, or if it is an upgraded turbo model with the E81 power pack, it may have a 380 millimeter front disc. Now, the normal brake kits that you encounter, the 350s and the 330s, they're remarkably well priced and fairly affordable with regards to parts. The upgraded version, obviously being fairly rare and being a larger disc, it is going to be more expensive. So in terms of your service costs, if you're thinking about buying a Cayenne, that is something to be aware of with regards to the Turbo S and some of the upgraded 957 models. Outside of that, you just want to make sure you flush your brake fluid every 2 years to keep that fresh and to make sure everything's good. If you are experiencing braking problems with your Cayenne, specifically vibration or pulsation through the pedal, things like that, you may want to check the quality of rotors that are currently on the car. A high carbon, high quality rotor like a Zimmerman or something like that is going to definitely be recommended. A lower quality rotor, although it certainly may cost less, may actually end up giving you pretty inconsistent performance. It's just something to be aware of with regards to the quality of parts you put into the braking system. So from there, let's get into the suspensions. Now, the standard suspension on the Porsche Cayenne is a typical coil spring over shock absorber design. It is the standard option on every single Cayenne model, with the exception of the turbos. The turbos come with the ride height adjustable active air suspension as a standard option. The air suspension was an option on every other Cayenne model, and it is probably going to be one of the more common things that you'll find, especially on the GTS and the S and things like that. Now, the standard coil suspension, there's really not a lot to talk about. It's very simple, very straightforward. Just your normal shock absorber failures can occur. Usually as the miles pile up, they'll begin to leak and you'll begin to lose some damping control. Typically, you're going to see that with some visible oil and dirt and debris collecting on the damper or the shock absorber body itself. And you will eventually notice a loss of performance there, whether it's bouncing, a little bit of an unsteady ride, or potentially uneven wear on the tires with some cupping and things like that. That's really all there is to talk about. Obviously, there are mounts and various other components, but really the shock absorbers are going to be the primary wear component. So with that said about the standard suspension, we will get into the air suspension. And the air suspension, although it is far more complex and does potentially have a little bit more service that's required, it is really kind of the secret sauce of the Cayenne. So although it takes a little bit more to maintain and repair, it's kind of worth it in my opinion. So with the air suspension on the Porsche Cayenne, you have a couple different controls. You have 6 selectable user ride heights, and you also have Porsche Active Suspension Management, or PASM, damper control. So essentially it's an active ride height unit that's controlled by the airbag, and it also has adjustable damping that's controlled by the electrical connector at the bottom there. The most common problem you're going to encounter on these airbag units, the air struts themselves, are usually going to be something related to an air leakage issue or something along those lines. Essentially, you have a couple different areas where you could potentially have an air leak, and if you have an air leak in one of the bags, it will usually begin to kind of go down on that particular corner. It's worth noting that with the Cayenne, if you're noticing that one particular corner is down, it is more than likely going to be an issue related to that particular corner rather than the axle. Likewise, if you notice the whole front axle is down, it's extremely rare to actually have a problem with both front airbags at the same time. So you may be tempted to go figure that it's an air strut or something like that, but you may need to look elsewhere in the system. It is important to always make sure that if you do have a leak or some kind of an issue with one of your airbags or an air leak elsewhere in the system, that you stay on top of it. So the reason is that the air suspension obviously is supplied with compressed air from this air compressor, and this is up at the passenger kind of front side underneath of the car, underneath one of the protective panels there, and this fills an air tank that's in the back of the car. So if you have an air leak, whether it's at the strut at an airline or possibly at the valve control block that we'll talk about a little bit later, this pump is going to run quite frequently and will eventually burn out. And that is one of the more common problems that you'll encounter with the air suspension on the Cayenne, is this compressor motor burning out and needing to be replaced. Typically what you'll notice is that if you have an air leak that's fairly minor, it'll go down slowly while the car sits, usually overnight or possibly over a span of a few days or something like that. The compressor itself is fairly straightforward to replace, but it is a little bit pricey, so you want to make sure that you take care of that rather than letting the compressor burn out. The air tank itself that's at the back of the car, you're basically not going to have a problem with that. There's no moving parts, but the control valve block that is also located in that area is something that could potentially be a problem. So the valve block is essentially the unit that's responsible for taking all of the information from the ride height control unit and things like that and sending that to these air struts. So it's constantly metering air in and out to make the air suspension do whatever it's going to do, whether that's raising the car up for some of the off-road modes, lowering it down for the high-speed stuff, or just working to keep the car flat in the corners, which is one of the reasons that this suspension is so trick. It's always working to give the car the best handling and the best performance no matter what the situation is. So that valve block, if it goes bad, you could potentially have one particular corner that goes down, one particular side, or one particular end of the car, or something like that. So if it is a problem, it is one of the more difficult ones to diagnose just because you have to eliminate some other factors before you actually get into that unit. Failures within that are not super common, but it is something to be aware of if you're kind of chasing your tail on an issue and you can't quite seem to figure out what that solution is. The last kind of problem that you may encounter on the air suspension itself is going to typically be related to the PASM system. So PASM, as I said, it's Porsche Active Suspension Management, and it's an active adjustable damper system. It is electronically controlled, and as you can see, these connections are located down at the bottom of these struts. Obviously, if you're driving the car off-road, or if you're driving the car in conditions where there's a lot of salt or water and a lot of kind of corrosive material, it is possible for water to get in there and begin to corrode those connections and give you problems. If you do have a problem with the PASM system, you're going to get a PASM fault on your dashboard and let you know that that's happening. So always just kind of pay attention to those and make sure you're staying on top of it. If you do have one of those problems, it's important to check these connectors, pull them apart, see if you're getting some corrosion in there, and see if you can clean it before going ahead and replacing the entire unit. Now, we typically sell these Arnott Industries air struts and shocks on our website, and they're essentially a direct swap for the factory units. So the final piece of the puzzle with regards to talking about the air suspension has to do with the air ride level sensors. So there's a level sensor at each individual corner that feeds back information to the control unit to let it know where that suspension is, where it is, in terms of ride height. They can fail one of two ways. They can fail completely, so if there's an open circuit, or it can fail and begin to give the wrong resistance or wrong information to the control unit about the ride height. So it is entirely possible for one corner of the Cayenne to end up at its maximum ride height or higher because the ride height level sensor is bad. Similar to the electrical connectors on the bottom of the shock absorbers, they can be susceptible to corrosion and things like that. They can also break. There's a fairly, I don't want to call it flimsy, but there's a fairly delicate link that actually goes to the ride height level control lever, and those can begin to corrode and get dirt and debris in them over time and need to be replaced. If it breaks, obviously, you know, the level control is not going to move, and you're going to get a number of problems related to the Cayenne's ride height. So if you do have a Cayenne with an air suspension and you've decided it's a little bit too much of a headache, maybe you have a problem that you've been chasing and you can't quite figure out and you don't want to deal with it anymore, we do have a solution for you. Arnott Industries does have a complete coil spring conversion kit for the Air Ride Cayenne models from 2003 to 2010, and it includes all the replacement pieces you need to change to a standard coil suspension. So it replaces the airbag strut unit with a standard shock absorber and spring unit, and it also does away with the adjustable damping. So the kit does come with a defeat device to basically plug in and eliminate any codes or any problems that you would normally have from unplugging the PASM shock absorber. So obviously it does away with a lot of the advantages that the air suspension provides, but it is truly simple and service-free, and it may be the right choice for you. So that pretty much takes care of the major talking points on the first generation Cayenne suspension and braking system. We're gonna do a quick reset on the table here, and we're gonna jump into some of the problems and some of the things that you may need to address with regards to the body and the electrical components. So before we get into the electrics, we're gonna talk about one thing first, and that is the manual rear hatch shock. So a Cayenne 957 or 955 is available with either a manual or power rear hatch. The manual rear hatch has these shock absorber struts that basically help to open and then keep the rear hatch or rear door open. These do fail over time, and they will lose gas pressure, and you'll notice that because you know, the hatch will start to fall down. Almost any vehicle that you've probably had or driven may have one of these on the hood or one of these on the back hatch or something like that. And once they start to get weak, the hatch is going to lose pressure and fall down. The difference is that on the Cayenne, it's really, really, really heavy, and you do not want to get hit in the head by one of these things. So these hatch shocks are fairly common to need to be replaced. It's not an exceptionally technical process, but you do have to pull down some of the interior panels and things at the back in order to gain access on this. So if you notice that your rear hatch is starting to kind of fall down on you or not stay open, this is what's actually bad. It's located up in the top area of the hatch kind of hinge area, and that's where you're going to gain access to those to replace them. So the first thing that we're going to talk about with regards to the electronics or electrics in the Porsche Cayenne has to do with the headlights. Now these headlights are very similar to other Porsche models in that they slide into the body of the car on little tracks and they lock into place. The electrical connection is made automatically as the headlight slides in. The issue comes up when it slides in and locks in, and this electrical connection doesn't make a tight connection to the headlight. This is mounted in a little plastic bracket and it can flex and whatnot. So the problem there is that when the electrical connection is not solid, you get extra resistance, which means extra heat. Heat means melting in this harness and some potential damage. Now these replacement harnesses are available from Porsche, and they're fairly straightforward and easy to replace, but the issue comes in where these go for a little while and they're damaged, and they can potentially damage the headlight unit itself. So generally, whenever you're working on the vehicle, if you haven't checked this, you may want to just kind of pull things out and see where you are to make sure that you don't have some kind of issue going on with these harnesses. So the next two issues are potentially semi-related. The first has to do with what's called the Kessy system. Kessy is essentially like a wireless transmitter system that goes from your key fob to the car to let the car know that you are there and it's ready to power up, maybe unlock the doors or start the vehicle, usually with a push button or something like that. You can have Kessy communication issues on the Cayenne. It's not extraordinarily common, but it can happen, or it can be one of the more difficult problems to diagnose simply because it's electronic in nature and there's a few components you kind of have to rule out. You know, it could be an antenna, it could be your key fob itself, etc. Usually you're going to get some kind of an error code on the dashboard there with regards to key not in range or something along those lines. And it unfortunately is one of those things that you are going to need access to a scan tool to try to chase down those issues. So the last component that we're going to talk about on the Porsche Cayenne, as far as the electronics, has to do with the steering column. One of the issues you may encounter is what's called a steering column fault, and an error code will display on your dashboard that says steering faulty. When that happens, you won't be able to start the car, and the steering wheel and the steering column may lock itself. Unfortunately, when that happens, there is no way to defeat it or get around it other than repair it, and you're not going to be able to do that at the grocery store parking lot. So you're going to have to tow the car home at that point. You have a couple options with regards to repairing this. Some of them are fairly expensive and some of them are not. If you were to get it towed to a Porsche dealership, they're going to sell you a complete steering column unit, and they're going to want to install it and program it for you. And needless to say, being a Porsche dealership, the parts and the labor are going to be pretty expensive. The steering column itself is probably around $1,600 or so, depending on the exact model. The less expensive and more recommended way to do it is usually to either remove the faulty steering column lock unit that is on your current Cayenne, along with your Kessy control unit, and send that out to a repair place that may recondition it for you, or that will recondition it for you, and get it done for a much lower amount of money. The other option, if you prefer, is you can buy a complete brand new steering column, remove just that one faulty component, and again, send that out with your Kessy control unit to be reprogrammed, and you'll be on your way for a substantially lower amount of money, and with a lot less time invested. You can do the steering column lock replacement without having to remove the entire steering column from the car. So if that does happen on your Cayenne, or if that's the problem that you encounter, obviously it's going to be really, really inconvenient, but just know that there are some ways around it that are going to cost you thousands of dollars less versus going to the dealership and trying to get it done through them. So one last thing to keep in mind when you're working on the electrical system of the Porsche Cayenne is that many of the components, just like any other Porsche model, may need to be programmed to that car when they are replaced. So if you're talking about electronic control units, headlights, things like that, occasionally they may need to be reprogrammed. So if you don't have a Porsche scan tool or something that can do that, it may be a good idea to have a decent relationship either with an independent Porsche shop close to you that has access to those tools, or possibly discuss it with a dealership. Now granted, the dealership's going to be the more expensive option, but if that's all you have, you're still going to be able to save quite a bit of money by replacing the parts yourself and having the program part of it just done by the dealership. So that about wraps it up with the major suspension, braking, and electronic components that you may need to address on your first generation Porsche Cayenne. If you are interested in more information, we do have a Cayenne hub on our website, so go over to fspr.com and check those out. We also have some more in-depth technical articles and things like that on our blog as well. If you like the video, please hit the like button. If you have any questions, comments, or if you've owned a Cayenne and have a first-hand experience with some of these issues or items, please drop them in the comment section below. If you haven't already, of course, subscribe to the channel. And with that, we will see you on the next video.